cloud service delivery models. In this section, we will look at the various cloud service delivery models that are available from the cloud providers. As part of this section, we will look at the various cloud service delivery models such as infrastructure as a service, what is it? Platform as a service, which is PaaS, software as a service, which is SaaS, database as a service, which is DBaaS, communication as a service, which is called CaaS, business process as a service, BPaaS, and then there is even something called anything as a service, which is XaaS. These are the theoretical services that are available from the cloud providers. Now, the cloud providers themselves may not call them as IaaS and PaaS and SaaS. They may just list a bunch of services on their website, but they kind of fit in one of these different categories. They may even invent a new category. There are, in fact, many new categories of services that are coming online. Before we look at these services and understand them, let's quickly go to the websites of these various cloud providers and see what services they are offering. Here I am at aws.amazon.com, which is the Amazon Web Service Cloud provider. If you go into products, you will see that here's a list of all the products that they have. They have the compute service, which is your infrastructure service, storage and content delivery service, which is also in a way an IaaS service. They have database services, networking services. They all kind of come under IaaS services. There is application services, which are your Elastic Beanstalk, Simple Message Service. All those things are your PaaS services. They also have some enterprise application services. For example, Workspaces. That's an enterprise application service where you can launch your own workstations on the internet, on the cloud. Then there's also WorkDocs, which is basically a way by which you can share documents on the internet. So there's a lot of software services that are available. So they don't quite call them as IaaS and PaaS and SaaS. Those are theoretical terms, but these are services that are available for you from AWS. If you look at Google Compute, Google also has their own cloud computing services. And if you look at their service, you'll see that they have the compute service, they have storage service, networking service. Those are your IaaS services. They have some big data services, which are platform services. They have some software services, which is your SaaS. So they also have some more platform services right here for logging and monitoring. So they have their own set of services. Again, they fall under the various categories of various service models that are available. If you look at Microsoft Azure and look at the various products that they have, you can go to their features. They have their compute, which is their infrastructure service, web and mobile services, data storage services. They have analytics services, Internet of Things, networking services. So they also have their own set of services that's available for the cloud consumers. Okay, so as you can see, these cloud providers offer these various services, and they may have their own terms for these services. What we will do in this section is to look at the theoretical generalized name for these services and look at what these services offer. Now, when it comes to service delivery models, NIST in its document 800-145 talks about three service models. They are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. They are the NIST services. Well, it so happens that there are also some non-NIST defined services like database as a service, which is DBaaS, communication as a service, CaaS, business process as a service, which is BPaaS, and anything as a service, which is literally any service that is being invented as I speak right now, as I record right now, is categorized as XaaS. So these are what we call the non-NIST defined services, but they're all basically cloud services. So let's look at all these different services and what they mean. Now let's look at infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is also called IaaS. In this model, the cloud consumer, which is an organization that wants to use the cloud, in this class that's going to be us, because we are going to be the cloud consumer that is going to be using the services that are offered by the cloud providers, we outsource the responsibility of the infrastructure to the cloud provider. So as a cloud consumer, we basically tell the cloud provider, you have all the infrastructure and all I'm going to do is rent it from you or lease it from you. The cloud provider typically owns the infrastructure. We as a cloud consumer don't have to own the infrastructure. And the cloud provider's infrastructure would include the hardware, which could be the network, the connectivity, the operating system. All that stuff is all part of the cloud service provider's environment. The cloud consumer, which is us, we will use those cloud services, we will use those infrastructure cloud services, and we will be charged on a pay-as-you-go basis or pay-as-you-grow basis. The IT resources are typically virtualized. We don't really get a physical hardware, we get a virtual machine, whether it is a server, which is a virtual server, or it's a firewall or a load balancer. They're all going to be virtualized environment, or even storage for that matter will be virtualized for us. Here is infrastructure as a service in action. What you're seeing over here is a cloud consumer. The cloud consumer wants to use an IaaS service. In this case, we have the cloud provider represented by the cloud. That's the cloud provider's boundary. The cloud provider has physical servers. That's his physical infrastructure. In this case, the cloud consumer communicates with the cloud provider using maybe a web browser and web console, and basically provisions a server. In this case, we are provisioning a 32 gigabyte machine with 4 gigabyte local storage and agreeing to a 99.4% SLA, no failover, at the rate of $0.95 per hour, at the rate of 5 cents per gigabyte for transferring the data out from the cloud. So there's a contract there, and the cloud consumer is agreeing to that contract. The cloud consumer goes to the cloud provider's website, provisions such a machine, and within a few minutes the machine is available so that the cloud consumer can use this particular virtualized hardware or virtualized infrastructure. That's an example of an infrastructure as a service. Here I'm showing you a virtual server. It could be a firewall, it could be a load balancer, it could be a storage device. All those things are available as infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service. Sometimes the cloud consumer wants to not even deal with the infrastructure. The cloud consumer wants to only write the application in a specific language, maybe Java or Python or PHP, or maybe even buy or download an open source application and then deploy that application onto the cloud. For example, I could go to WordPress, download the WordPress application, and I could deploy it into the cloud. Now, when you deploy a WordPress application into the cloud, you need a database, you need an application server, and in platform as a service, which is also called PaaS, the consumer outsources the application platform environment to the provider. Basically, the consumer is saying, I don't really care about what virtual servers there are. I don't really care about what network equipments there are. All I really care about is give me an environment where I can deploy my WordPress application. Give me an environment where I can deploy my database. And that's really the idea behind platform as a service. So the consumer deploys the created application or the acquired application to the PaaS platform. The applications could be created using languages such as Java, Python, PHP, and they have to be based upon the tools that are supported by the provider. In other words, if the provider is able to support a Java EE based platform, then you can deploy your Java EE based application in the PaaS service. If the provider provides a Python based platform, then you can deploy a Python based application into the cloud provider environment. So the idea here is that applications is what the consumer is working on, doesn't really care about the underlying infrastructure. The consumer does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure. All the consumer cares about is the application server, application layer. And so the consumer can actually manage the application server, not really the underlying hardware. Consumer has control over the deployed applications. The consumer can go ahead and deploy an application, undeploy the application, change some of the configurations of the application servers, like the number of connections to the database, the connection pool, transaction, but cannot really get into the underlying virtual machine, that is managed by the IaaS. So you can almost think of PaaS being built on top of IaaS. This allows the consumers to focus on the apps, right? So we don't really have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. It's almost as if what you're saying is you want to build a web application, you go open up an IDE, you download all the necessary software to build your web application in Java, you write your servlets, JSP, and web pages, you build your WAR file, and then you deploy your WAR file into the application server. You don't really care how the application server was installed, on what machines they're installed. All you do is deploy it over there and it's ready to go. So in platform as a service, the cloud consumer, which is us, we write these applications and then we would deploy these applications in a cloud PaaS environment. So as you can see here, there's a virtual server, and then inside the virtual server or on top of the virtual server, which is really your IaaS, that's the virtual server, there is a ready-made environment, a platform environment where there may be a database, where there may be application servers, there may be a console so you can configure it, and all the cloud consumer does is deploys the application to that ready-made environment. You notice that the virtual machine, I have a question mark there. That's because the cloud consumer does not really know what kind of a virtual machine it is. The cloud consumer does not know whether it is a 8 GB RAM machine, is it quad core, is it 8 core, doesn't have any idea about that. All the cloud consumer knows is that there is an environment where I can deploy my applications into the application server. Now let's look at software as a service, which is also called SaaS. In the SaaS model, there is a software program that is already positioned as a shared cloud service by the cloud provider. So the cloud provider is already offering a cloud service, which is built on top of a PaaS, which is built on top of an IaaS. All the consumer wants to do is use this particular service. Examples of SaaS services include email service, Office software service like Microsoft Office, accounting service, CRM service, video publishing service, blogging service, social networking service. All these services, all the third-party software, all the software that we typically use for business processes, they may be available as a software service, and all we do is use the service. Now we know that at the lowest layer there is IaaS. On top of it is PaaS, which is the platform as a service. And the SaaS is actually built on top of that. So in the SaaS model, the cloud consumer only cares about the SaaS service, doesn't really care about the underlying PaaS service and the underlying IaaS service, only configures the SaaS. That's really the idea behind the SaaS model. There is an entire marketplace that exists around this SaaS model. Here's software as a service. In this case, we have a cloud consumer. In fact, he's a cloud service consumer. The cloud service consumer is interacting with a cloud provider. The cloud provider has a cloud service. Notice the cloud consumer is communicating with the cloud service, sending messages and getting responses back. And notice it has a question mark underneath it. In other words, we know it's built on top of a PaaS. We know it's built on top of an IaaS. But the cloud consumer has no idea as to what that infrastructure is. All the cloud consumer cares about is the service. Let me use the service. That's all the cloud consumer cares about. And that's the idea behind the SaaS model. So let's compare these three different models. Before we compare the IaaS model to PaaS model to SaaS model, let's look at them without these models. If I have to deploy applications all by myself without any of these cloud models, what would I do? Well, I would have to get my own networking gear. I would have to get my own storage. I would have to get my own servers. I'd have to get my own virtualization layer. I would have to get my own operating system, my own middleware, your application servers, my runtime environment like Java, JVM, and then my data, and then the applications. I would do all by myself, and I manage all these things by myself. This is what typically many organizations have been doing. This is your traditional computing model. Traditional model. With the cloud model, we enter this world of infrastructure as a service. In infrastructure as a service, we basically say, well, I don't want to do my own networking. I don't want to do my own storage. I don't want to do my own servers. I don't want to do my own virtualization. I'm going to have that managed by a vendor, an IaaS vendor, an IaaS provider, such as Amazon Web Services. And what I'm going to do now is choose the operating system, choose the application server middleware, choose my runtime environment, choose my data, and then my applications on top of that. That's infrastructure as a service. In this model, the pizza shop owner, which is Joe, is saying, I don't want to buy any of these hardwares. I just want to go to one of the infrastructure providers, but I'll go ahead and bring my own application server and my own software and things like that. In the PaaS model, which is the next model over here, in this model, the consumer says, well, I don't want to worry about the networking or the storage or the servers or the virtualization, which is your IaaS. I even don't want to worry about the operating system or the middleware, which is my application server, or the runtime environment. All I want to do is bring my own data and my own applications. That's all I really want to do. That would be the PaaS model. This would be the model where Joe from Joe's Pizza builds his applications and simply deploys the applications onto the cloud. He doesn't really manage even the application server. That's the PaaS model. In SaaS model, which is the software as a service model, the client, which is the cloud consumer, says, I don't want to worry about networking or storage or servers or virtualization, which is really done by the IaaS guys. I don't want to worry about OS or the middleware or the runtime environment, which is done by the PaaS guys. I also don't want to worry about applications, which is really offered by SaaS guys. There's a really cool application that somebody has already built and is selling online. I'm going to take that online service and use it. There may be somebody who's offering a module or an application that allows a pizza shop vendor to customize it and have a pizza shop online or a pizza website online. So in this model, Joe from Joe's Pizza simply takes the software service, a pizza service that is available already, customizes it for his own use, and then utilizes it. And that's the software as a service model. There's a lot of money to be made in this particular model, where you're offering software that is available for others to use. Now that we are actually comparing cloud services to pizza, let's go ahead and actually compare the cloud services to pizza making process. Now, if you have to make your own pizza, what do? Well, if you have to make the pizza at home, you get your cheese, your toppings, your tomato sauce, pizza dough, fire, oven, electric gas, soda, and dining table. All you have it on premise in your home, in your kitchen, and then you make the pizza. That would be your traditional computing model. The next model could be that you're like, I don't want to make my own cheese. I don't want to make my own toppings. I don't want to make my own tomato sauce. I don't want to make my own pizza dough. I'm just going to buy all these things. You buy all these things from the store. But at home you have your fire, your oven, your electric gas, your soda and dining table. You have all these things in your house. And so you end up only worrying about the fire, the oven, the electric gas, soda and dining table, and not worry about any of the other underlying things. And you just simply take the stuff that's from the marketplace and you bake it. In platform as a service, you say, I don't want to worry about making my own cheese, toppings, tomato sauce, pizza dough, fire, oven, electric gas. All I'm going to do is bring my soda and dining table, and I'm just going to get the pizza delivered to my house and I'm going to eat it. In the software as a service model, you're like, I don't want to worry about any of these things. I don't want to worry about cheese, toppings, tomato sauce, pizza dough, fire, oven, electric gas, soda, and dining table. All I will do is simply go to the pizza place and order pizza and eat it right there and come back home. I don't want to have any dining table. I'm going to use the dining table that's out there in the store. That would be the SaaS model. Now let's look at the cloud service delivery model control levels. Let's see what level of control do you have across these different service models. When you use IaaS model, you have full administrative control. You have full access to the virtualized infrastructure, which are your IT resources, and maybe even your physical IT resources if they allow you to do that. In the PaaS model, you have limited administrative capabilities. You have moderate level of control over the IT resources. You can say, I want to be able to support 1,500 users. You can say, I want to be able to support this kind of logging. You can say you want this level of transactions. So a little bit of control you have, but not too much, not at the level of how much RAM and how much storage you want. When it comes to the PaaS model, you have more control over the usage related information, how many users, how many transactions per second, more the front-end user interface. I want my color to be green and I want the page to look like this. You have that level of control, but not really the underlying platform control or the infrastructure control. So as you can see, as you choose the delivery models, as you go from IaaS to PaaS, your level of control decreases. The control is going to decrease. And as you go down the chain, go from SaaS to PaaS to IaaS, your control actually gets better. It increases. Let's look at the typical activities that are carried by the consumers versus the providers in these different models. When you're doing the IaaS model, in the IaaS model, you as a consumer sets up and configures the bad infrastructure. You have to log in to the provider's site and say what kind of hardware you want, what kind of machines you want, how much memory, how much storage, what kind of networking you want, the firewalls, all those things you need to do. You even have to monitor these services, right? The provider is basically providing you a management infrastructure that allows you to provision these services. That's all they really need to do. They need to allow you to provision it and maybe monitor them to make sure that all those services are running. In the PaaS model, you as a consumer are developing your applications. You're developing, testing, and deploying applications. You don't really care about the underlying infrastructure. Here, the provider, in other words, in the PaaS model, the provider has a little bit more responsibility. The PaaS provider is pre-configuring the platform and also provisions the underlying infrastructure and the middleware that you need so that you can deploy your application. So the level of responsibility is increasing for the platform provider in the PaaS model versus the IaaS model. And for you, the level of responsibility is decreasing. You're worried more about the application. In the SaaS model, you as a consumer, all you have to do is set and configure the cloud service. You don't really care about the underlying infrastructure or the platform. Here, the platform provider implements and manages all the underlying infrastructure and the platforms and even monitors the usage by consumers. Here, the provider has to do everything that he has to do in the IaaS and the PaaS model and, of course, the SaaS model. So the point I'm trying to make is as you, as a consumer, are choosing to go from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS, as a consumer, your level of responsibility decreases. Whereas for the provider, the level of responsibility is increasing as the provider moves from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS models. Up to this point, we've been looking at various services such as the IaaS, the PaaS, and the SaaS service as defined by NIST. They are extremely important services that you need to understand in great depth. But there are a few non-NIST services that you kind of need to know that those services exist. They are, to some extent, you can almost say that these non-NIST services are more SaaS services. In other words, they are variations of software as a service. One of the first ones is communication as a service, which is CaaS. In this model, the cloud service provider provides communications Up to this point, we looked at three major cloud service delivery models: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. They are extremely important delivery models. We talked about them in reasonable depth. Now at this point, let's look at some of the other non-NIST services that you should be familiar with as a cloud professional. You can almost say that the services that I'm going to discuss right now are more a variation of the SaaS model. They're specialized SaaS model. One of the first ones I want to talk about is communication as a service, which is also called CaaS, C-A-S-S. In this model, the cloud service provider is providing communication services to cloud consumers. Now, what is a communication service? A communication service could be something like a VoIP service or an instant messaging service or some kind of a telephone PBX service or even video conferencing service. If you're a company, you may want to have voice messaging. You may want to have video conferencing. Those services, it used to be that if you're a company, you would have to buy all the equipments. Now, there are companies that are offering these services as part of cloud service providers, so you really don't even have to have any of these equipments in your premises. If you want voicemail, if you want telecommunication services, you want video conferencing services, they're all available for you as part of cloud service model. A classic example of video communication service would be Skype. In a way, that's also a cloud service. Or Citrix GoToMeeting for doing meetings online. Now let's look at business process as a service, which is called BPaaS. Business process as a service is really horizontal or vertical business process that's actually delivered on the cloud using the cloud services model. Now, what are these horizontal and vertical business process services? E-commerce online store, a company that is offering e-commerce service on the cloud. In other words, you don't have to really write any software. All you do is you customize the e-commerce service for your business. That would be a vertical business, an e-commerce service that's available. Medical transcription service. If you want to transcribe your prescriptions, many hospitals use this service. So these are all specialized horizontal and vertical services that are being offered online through cloud providers. This is representing the penetration of cloud beyond your technical ID. When we started, we said IT will be offered as a service, which is your virtual machines and your firewalls and load balancers and storage. But now more and more services are being offered as a cloud service so other companies can use them. BPaaS, which is business process service, typically requires some kind of a human process actor. For example, in medical transcription process, you can upload your prescription and there is a human on the other side that is basically transcribing it and sending it back. So this is your business process. And that's being offered online. All you do is simply subscribe to that particular service, send your message, and down comes the answer. There are many people that are actually moving into this kind of a service offering. And then there is XaaS, which is a collective term that stands for a number of things. X could stand for anything or even everything as a service. Really, it's a collective term that represents an increasing number of services that are being delivered online over the internet, over the cloud. You can even represent XaaS as a service for one or a combination of these different services that we just talked about. So it's really a generic term. It's really no specific service. It's really a generic term that says there is anything that is being offered as a service. So in summary, we looked at the NIST service models, which is the IaaS, the PaaS, and the SaaS. We realized that as a cloud consumer, as we go from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS, the amount of work that we have to do actually reduces, but the amount of work that the cloud provider has to do increases. Then we also looked at the non-NIST service models like communication as a service, business process as a service, and even anything as a service, which are really variations of software as a service that are available for us to use as a consumer.